Burn us in.
Yep.
They win.
It looks like it's going right now.
Well, there we go. Mr. Producer off to a strong start. Welcome, everybody. This is I Want to Be a GM. I am Jester Borris here today with...
I'm Troy, the Planescape Guy, as always.
I did say, here we go.
The disembodied voices. What are you going to do? Okay. So, welcome to Allies and Antagonists, which is our theme for the year. We're going to be talking about building compelling bad guys. We're going to be talking about also compelling and interesting allies. And beyond that, how you can apply what we're talking about to your personal or player characters to build a character that's got more depth, can have some drive, and be able to really be in that world.
Yeah, don't forget the NPCs, too. A lot of what we're going to be talking about, you can apply right to the bad guys. Well, I mean, to flesh them out and make them be more real, more evil.
And some of the things here you'll see too, we'll talk about it as we go, but you can apply it at levels, right? Your small time background sort of NPC doesn't need to have as much depth as sort of your feature villain or feature ally or a player character might want to have.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The village smithy working down the end of the street, you don't need to have 20-year history on him.
No.
Everybody knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's fixing my stuff.
But the 25th level wizard that retired and now has a tower at the end of the street.
Yeah, the one that keeps sending you on fetch quests for weird stuff.
Yeah. Since he's going to appear more often in and around your story, you're going to want to know more about him because his history will and should have things that are brought forward into the current day storyline.
One of the themes that you're going to find throughout our episodes will be making your characters of the world setting that they inhabit, not just characters that happen to be in the world setting, sort of running around.
Yeah, if you have a character that's from, let's say, the world of Greyhawk, and then the same character from the world of Forgotten Realms, or even two different countries in the Forgotten Realms,
yeah,
they're going to be completely different. Their mannerisms, their culture, their clothing, their armor, the way they fight. Maybe even their spells are completely different. There's going to be a lot of differences, and each of those add a little flavor to that character. And it's really nice when you introduce an NPC again, and all the players at the table go, "Oh, it's that guy."
Right. Even when you have somebody that they haven't met before, and you can describe a certain dress or mannerisms or imagery that they've got, and you're like, oh, okay, so now we're dealing with an envoy from the kingdom of someplace that's also in the world setting. It makes the world bigger, it makes it feel alive, and it connects those characters into that story.
The word I like to use for designing a lot of things that I do, characters as well as anything in your venture, is justify. I want this guy to wear leather armor. He comes from a certain country. Well, that armor should look like a style that's from that country.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So you justify his leather armor looking a certain way because he's from that country. He has a certain weapon and a certain fighting style justified because he comes from a certain country.
Yeah, a German soldier wearing leather armor is going to look different than a Japanese soldier wearing leather armor.
Exactly. So just little details like that will make a big difference on the character, the way he's perceived.
Yep.
And the way he's feared.
So before we dive into the core of the topic, we've got another announcement. You guys will see that we're not in the studio today. We're actually here live. Tell us where we're at.
This is Griffin's Keep, Cards, Comics, and Games. It's the new home of Griffin's Keeps. I Want to Be a GM. Our 4 and 7 game sidekicks. Everything we do. It's a game store that we've opened out here in Willard, Missouri. I would invite everybody to come by and see us. 304 East Jackson, Suite 5A. Open 7 days a week, 1 to 8.
Indeed. I also want to say thank you to all of our friends and partners. Haven Games, Nowhere Store, Forgotten Lore, Meta Games. There's also 5C's, Dirk's Taverns. There's a lot of gaming in the area, and we've been really blessed by that. And we've been, also blessed to have great partners and friends in those game stores.
Absolutely. Havens and Nowhere were a big help in just getting up off the ground.
So thanks you, you guys. And then again, a reminder, play local, buy local, keep those game stores alive, build the community that you want, and it will be there.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that's really overwhelmed me by moving out here. Everybody's like, we got a game store in Willard now. Like, yes,
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Welcome to small town Missouri.
Yay!
So, we're glad to be
If you
here.
build it, nerds will come.
They will actually. So it's been
And they have.
it's been great. So let's jump into some of this here. We're going to start kind of setting up what we're talking about here. So an antagonist. Right? I'm not talking about villains. I'm not talking about people who are evil, though those things can apply.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you may find that you'll end up with somebody who's the villain in your story is a good guy in theirs, right?
Yeah, so the antagonist could be just somebody behind the scenes that doesn't want to get really involved. He doesn't want you to know that he's doing something.
Well,
know.
in that regard, he'd still be the villain. But I mean, somebody who's justified in their own mind comes into conflict with you.
Yeah,
Right.
it could be anything as small as the merchant who's trying to rip everybody off all the time.
Or the other country that's trying to avenge what they feel is a slight against them or something happens. They're not necessarily evil. They're not coming over here to kill, burn, loot, conquer. But, you've come into conflict because you've got a difference of opinion or outlook.
Yeah,
or
like those
something.
guys in the Planescape, the paladins who want to end all of reality.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
they're still paladins.
they are.
And you're definitely going to come into conflict with them.
Oh, absolutely.
But they are unnecessarily lawful.
Lawful means you understand
Yeah,
the
the
rules
structure.
and structure of a society,
Yeah.
and you will obey them.
And it does get murky in Planescape when you start talking about good versus evil. But, again, you can come into conflict with those forces, and they don't necessarily have to be evil as we understand it, or they don't have to be out to kill, burn, loot, and murder everything. But they're still going to be the antagonist in the story. The things that they're trying to do are going to cause harm, disruption. They're going to be the thing that you're trying to stop or the problem you're trying to
They're
solve.
usually associated somehow with the problem and why the heroes have to be there in the first place.
Now, obviously we play a lot of D&D, and so you tend to, in those fantasy settings, have that more stereotypical, like the evil, the brooding necromancer or something of that nature. So it's a little easier. But when you get into like cyberpunk, right? On the mean streets of Night City, you're not necessarily the good guy when you're also blazing powder on the streets with the gangs, but you are the hero of the story, and the people that are antagonistic to your aims are going to be a little bit different, even though they feel they're justified for different reasons. So that's why we talk about antagonists. Just keep in mind broadly that, the guys that are the problem aren't necessarily always evil, but they are causing problems.
Absolutely.
And this is where we get to your 3 different timelines thing,
Well,
where you have your players, the bad guy, and the world. Because the bad guy is going to be typically interacting with the world.
Well, that's the antagonist.
Yeah, and so we'll dive into that a little bit more when we talk about structuring the story. So the other one we're talking about, of course, will be allies, and often we don't talk enough about allies when it comes to your fantasy settings.
Mm-hmm.
Our heroes are going around and doing things, but particularly in the earlier games, the lower level stuff, you're kind of taking those like job opportunities. I've got rats in my basement. I got goblins.
Yeah. I mean, almost even up into the higher levels, you're going to be taking a job from somebody, be it the local tavern keeper who wants the rats in his basement taken care of, to the king who has a problem with his neighbor and he wants you to go kidnap a general or something. So you're going to be working for somebody. Typically, you can list them as an ally, and there's a loose definition with ally, meaning we're working together, and I should be able to expect certain assistance from time to time.
Right.
Hey, get me out of here now.
And
I'm sorry, CIA has plausible deniability. We don't know who you are.
Well, this is the other thing that we're going to talk about is the depth of those relationships.
Sure.
While they may be an antagonist to you, are they your mortal enemy? Is this He-Man and Skeletor? Or is it your neighbor whose dog comes over and poops in your yard?
It's also,
there's different depths.
let's look at some of the subtle relationships that James Bond had with some of his bad guys.
Well, are we
They
talking
would
about?
have dinner together
Yeah.
and talk about in casual conversation, I'm going to kill you when I get done with dinner. But that would be uncivilized. We must dine first.
Sure.
Oh, this is a fantastic wine. Where did you get this? So, yes, it's the antagonist, but could he be an ally? Because I've seen some of the James Bond movies. he would enlist the assistance of a known bad guy to help with another bad guy.
Right, and so usually it was the ladies
Well,
in James Bond's case. But again, so
that's another subject. We haven't got that.
I always like having the bad guys hire the party.
that's fun too.
That's fun too.
But that's
Yes.
again story stuff. So, but the depth of it, right? So a mentor is different than the guy you can reliably go to for jobs.
Yes.
You know, if you're a knight in service of the king and there's the knight captain and other knights of the realm, is going to be different than the farmer that you might come across or those sort of things. So the depth of these relationships will vary too as we write these characters and we understand the roles they're going to play in the stories, how they're going to interact with our characters and the rest of the world. That sort of stuff will become apparent. And then I think that's really kind of it before we get into the different types of antagonists. So we got some interesting ones here because we're not talking always about people. So personal, of course, would be your one-on-one rivalries. You know, again, Skeletor and He-Man. We're going to hear a lot about them because they're a lot of fun. Then you can have systemic antagonists. So institutions, hierarchies, belief systems, right? The Catholic Church as a whole and the conspiracy theories and the machinations and things that we've seen in different media and those sorts of things. That could be considered a systemic ally. We're not worried about, like, the Pope is not over here giving you a hard time, but just the structure around the church and the different things that go on and this sort of stuff could be considered a systemic antagonist. Now, whether they're the primary to your story or not is different. But even when you're dealing with, different laws, or we're talking about caste systems, depending on the stories and settings we're dealing with, those can end up being antagonistic to your character's goals.
So kind of like in He-Man, where Thulsa Doom was the direct.
Thulsa, dude, we're talking about Conan,
Yeah.
not He-Man.
Yeah, I know, Conan.
You said He-Man.
You said He-Man.
No, I said Conan.
Stop your minstrel.
Anyway, so Thulsa Doom was in direct conflict with Conan, but also the snake cult was a thing that was just generally oppressive.
Right,
But
but
those
they say,
also Doom was doing the snake cult just to take over territory.
Right, but
And
so
then-
that was your general antagonist that he was talking
Right.
about.
Right.
well, that's how he presented into the world. So it's a little bit different as we go in and I'll understand the structure here. But other things, environmental antagonists. Number one would be natural disasters.
Greenpeace?
Natural, not just
Oh.
regular disasters. So, but an oil spill, a forest fire, a volcanic eruption. Ask Pompeii about that. Those things can be pretty antagonistic to your characters and their stories. Whether again with, like, in the case of a forest fire, are we dealing with arson? Are we dealing with a natural disaster? There's a lot of things that have to be solved in that problem. The immediacy of finding safety and shelter, getting out of the area, and then
What about when a god drops a mountain on somebody?
that's a little bit different, but yeah, it becomes very well
For
the
the area, the area.
Yeah,
And then
the third age of Dragonlance.
Right.
But that became a huge deal. Rewrote
How many D6s is that?
all of them.
all of them.
Anyway, then the other things here would be supernatural, right? So outsiders, gods, and unknowable forces. When you're dealing with spirits and things that maybe aren't tangible or could be seen, depending on the story that you're going for, the world setting that you're in, these things could be either direct or indirect antagonists to your heroes.
Stupid Cthulhu.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen this here too, Troy. Like in Greyhawk, the gods were quite active.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so-
you'd meet one walking down the street.
You could.
Potentially, and a lot like when we see in Greek stories, right? They were very directly antagonistic to
Yeah.
Odysseus, as an example.
Yeah.
But in other settings, their presence is less direct, but they could still be antagonistic. Dark Sun, as an example, on the counter of that, they're not wandering around the broken wastelands, but their presence can still be felt in their ebbs and flows and the power struggles that they've got affected the world setting.
And so you can also have your antagonist. I can't say it. So that guy,
Bad guys.
as well as your ally, and you can make your whole campaign themed around something religious. So
Yeah.
you have one, because if you have any kind of every pantheon, if we have more than 2 or 3 gods, you're going to have a couple there that just hate each other for whatever reason.
They're gonna have some problems.
And so this guy, he's going to get some of his clerics, his paladins together, and want you to go raid and destroy this temple over here. Well, those clerics and paladins, they're not good with that. So now that you have a fight going on in the name of these 2 different gods.
Well, and we'll see that when we talk about characters, specifically their objectives and motivations and how those come out into the world, right? So as a deity, you've got different ways to affect the world than if you're a bandit on the road.
Most deities will affect the world through their avatars or their teachings, their signs.
Yeah.
Some way they will make a message to a cleric. Go forth and raise an army.
So let's stay focused. We'll get at least this information out to the audience, Troy.
Okay.
Come on.
I'm sorry.
So types of allies here, we'll be dealing with mentors. So this could be a teacher. It could be a guiding voice if we want something a little bit more supernatural.
Obi-Wan is both of those things now.
He is both of those things, actually. It does that. So companions, and these would be people who are considered equal in station or power to your heroes. So like the Justice League, right? Batman and Superman.
And Robin?
Well, maybe.
No, they were on Teen Titans.
Yeah, Teen Titans. And they became Nightwing. There was a big problem. But, those that would be what you would consider, right? The Justice League would be some companions as far as allies go because they're of equal station or power relatively to each other.
And then Cyborg gets the shaft.
Yeah, so
He was always so cool.
you're going to have to let me talk here.
Guides.
Guides are short-term supporters. And so they're going to be... They can still be quite impactful, but they're typically more shallow relationships, but would be considered an ally in terms of the story overall. And then, of course, we're dealing with temporary and permanent relationships here in these allies, right? Loyalty, leverage, and then, of course, there's always the fun betrayal potential, depending on the character that we write, who starts as an ally. They may have a shift and become antagonistic later, or they were antagonistic all along, and they present as one thing while they've got a duality. So you will see that when we talk about allies. So power dynamics and conflicts. So where do these characters we're talking about stand in the social, magical, or political hierarchy? All right. So as we mentioned, bandits all the way up to the gods themselves. So as we're discussing, writing these characters, this is one of the things we need to understand because it's going to really go into, as we've already alluded, how they affect the world around them, what their goals and objectives might be, and that sort of stuff. And then, so what we're dealing with there, typically the questions we're answering is who holds the power and who wants it.
And there's conflict.
For sure, right there. And then as we get into this thing, we're going to talk about thematic opposition. How do the antagonists or allies reflect or challenge the story's core themes? So if we're dealing with typical high fantasy, where you've got, your bright, shining kingdom on a hill, right? The Excalibur, the Camelot story. And then beyond that, what's going to want to tear that down? What's opposite to that? And then the story is told through those opposites. That juxtaposition is going to give us either our moral conflict or some of our story elements and that sort of thing. And then what values do they hold that contrast to the PCs? Well, the evil lich hanging out in his tower is probably pretty obvious.
But he throws great parties.
He does throw great parties. They're a little dead, though. So, one of the things we'll generally, as we're talking about or thinking about these characters that we'll be adding to our stories, we want to understand where they go. What the values that they hold, right? And so if we're talking about Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms, pretty well understood world settings, then we also kind of understand the moral compasses that are in those world settings and the general morality. So if we're talking about playing a game where everybody's going to be paladins, well, we got lawful good. So if we're over here and they're chaotic good, even that sort of worldview change can be a source of conflict.
That can definitely be.
Not necessarily that everybody's, they're bad guys, but it can do that sort of thing. And then the other thing we want to look at is how do they model the behaviors, concepts, or theme of the story. So if you're dealing with somebody who's like objectively evil, usually they're the example of what not to do. Slavery, defiling corpses by raising armies of the dead, tyranny and that sort of stuff tends to go with that archetype of character. And so, when we're talking about the models, the behaviors that they model, or the concepts that they present, and those sorts of things, not only is the character is considered evil because of their bad behaviors, the things that we know that we want to eliminate from the world that are destructive to health, happiness, and progress, and that sort of stuff. And then the same thing for your allies. Is this somebody who is attempting to establish security, prosperity? Are they attempting to innovate or develop something? Those sorts of things would be things we'd want to consider as well.
Absolutely. Sometimes you just don't think about it. You just start putting it all together. You don't think about the details. And then when you get into the game, some player will ask you a question. And you go, you know what? Give me a minute.
So why did he build?
Why did he?
What was Marvin the Martian's need for the Pew 239 space modulator?
The explosive space modulator, because Earth is in his way. And he was trying to view something. I think he was trying to view something.
Is this a situation where the papers have been on file at the Galactic Office for the last 9 cycles?
No, they should have been.
They should have been.
They should have been.
Well, now we're being bulldozed.
Character development through opposition and support.
Yeah. So the antagonist, of course, will challenge the PCs, right? So once as the antagonist is furthering their goals and the heroes rise to stop them, and they become known in this conflict, then the antagonist will begin to challenge the PCs, right? Your worldviews and those sorts of stuff. Particularly when we're dealing with something that's a little bit deeper, when you get into like the fall of Anakin Skywalker, that shift in perspective and the way it challenged Obi-Wan. You start to see these different concepts come into conflict, not just the characters.
So one of the things that I like to do with antagonists, especially when I do a big outline for a big campaign, so you get your main bad guy, and he's going to have henchmen, hirelings that work for him and do things for him.
Right.
But in putting those people together and designing that character, I like to use some movies as a starting point or an inspiration, if you would. Everybody's seen The Mummy?
Oh, yeah.
So you remember Benny, who was running around with all the different necklaces so that no one would kill him? So the Mummy clearly is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Benny is just a henchman running around doing whatever so he doesn't get killed. He's an antagonist.
Oh, for sure.
So, but he's not. He's part of the team, but he's also like the clown of the team.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the good guy, Brendan Fraser and not Brendan.
Yeah, it's Brendan Fraser.
And the girl, forget her name, but they had her brother who was running around just trying to get money.
Yeah.
Every time they found something to treasure, he's like, how much is that worth? So he was definitely an antagonist to their progression of trying to save everybody.
Yeah, he had some character flaws, but he was
that was my point.
But this
character flaws can pull out your antagonist, or help design your antagonist.
Even in your allies, it gives you some depth to a person, for sure. And those are some of the things we
can also say this: without those two characters, the movie Mummy would have been a lot more boring.
Oh, for sure, it would have been
those two guys. Because you're like, oh, he almost got it. Oh, Benny, why'd you do that?
Well, and then to your point here with the brother character, your allies will typically support transformation by aiding growth or change.
Yeah.
And so, that was one of the flaws for the character. He was able to overcome that and actually, be a little helpful towards the end of the film. Not entirely, because that's not, he wasn't the fighter of the party so much.
No.
But still, as an ally, being able to support those things, either we're talking about a mentor role or somebody that can, sort of move those good things, those things that the party is after forward, is what you're going to end up seeing through the character development side of an ally.
So one of the things I like to do is put one of those type characters. And recently I had one of those type characters. I had he was a henchman of basically the horseman of the apocalypse. And he was a henchman, and his job, he was a cleric. So he was supposed to help them, because they're greater forms of undead.
Yeah.
And their horses were as well. And as a cleric, then he would help them from time to time. But he was overly burdened with wild magic.
Oh no.
So his as a priest, he had been corrupted by everything. He wasn't quite a necromancer. He wasn't quite a cleric. He was somewhere in the middle. But whenever he tried to cast something, I used the wild magic chart. And when stuff blows up on your boss, they tend to not look upon that very kindly.
Well, those bosses in particular have got no patience.
None whatsoever.
There's not a whole lot of grace coming
None
from those
whatsoever.
guys.
So when you're making your antagonist, don't forget the little guy that's trying to impress the boss, and so he can move up in the organization or maybe date the boss's daughter.
Well, see, that's a big thing with dragons, right? Kobolds with dragons.
For sure. So let's shift now. We've got kind of an idea of our allies and antagonists. Let's talk a little bit about the actual character writing itself, which would be the other paper.
Oh, there he is. I'm sorry.
And this can be applied, as Troy's alluded to, not just your main villain, but you want to have an idea of who his circle is, at least the inner circle. So as we're dealing with bad guys that get more and more powerful, they tend to need some help, and they'll have henchmen and things. Cobra Commander and all the guys around him, Destro and Baroness and so on. They were all main villains, and so one of our primary pieces of advice that we give to game masters when they attend our workshops is to make a character sheet for your bad guys.
Yep. So if and when they finally do get into a fight or they have to flee for their own safety, you have that character sheet instead of just saying, oh, they duck out the secret door in the back of the room. You don't want to get lazy with your bad guys like that and they always make it out. And when the heroes get an opportunity to actually confront them and hit them with a fireball, you need to know, can he actually defend against it?
Right.
Does he have an active defense? Does he have a pigeon with an emergency note stuck up his sleeve? He can say, help me.
So
Something.
a couple reasons for this. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to have to make it up on the fly. Your players will recognize this from the gameplay perspective. But if we're able to capture or defeat the villain, I need to know what's on him.
Yes.
And I need to know if these, what his escape tricks are, and if there's anything that's special or particular about him.
Yep, that sword that he's been killing everybody with.
Yeah.
Does it have a special purpose? Does it have some? Is it better than +2? Is it?
Yeah.
Is
that ring of teleportation he's got? How many charges does it have? Can
Yeah.
only he use it, and why? Any of these sorts of things are really good information that you'll get just from creating a character sheet for your bad guys or your allies in that matter too. But beyond that, you can go a step further and start to really begin to flesh these guys out. So obviously, we're going to start with what role these characters are going to take on. When I'm talking about my bad guys, of course, these are the bad guys. And then, am I sitting down to write one of my heroes, my allies for the heroes? So then we deal with what sort of antagonist are they? If I'm dealing with a bad guy and he's going to end up being a personal antagonist sort of to the party, typically that's going to be reflected in their personality, where they're going to latch onto something and they're going to want revenge or retribution, something like that, where they've been slighted. If they're not so much worried about these guys and they're just going to be more of a major issue, they still might be a personal antagonist, but their outlook might not reflect that vindictive nature or vindictive streak. And then we also want to talk about what their main purpose in the narrative is. So we've talked about around this a little bit. Skeletor, of course, his whole purpose is to drive the conflict. But Beastman, Triclops, and Evil Lyn are there to support him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the story, they're his henchmen, and they're as his agents, they also support his drive to power and his need to control things. And you'll see that acted through them. Mm-hmm. On the other side, if you've got a king, right, and he needs to establish peace, prosperity, and order, then his knights from there will reflect that too as his henchmen, as his people.
They better.
As far as a personal antagonist goes, I like to use revenants because you can have like the small underboss, right? You can have your level 5 boss for the dungeon, and then your party comes through and kills this guy. Well, he can take that because he can basically take that blow to his ego and come back as a revenant and just keep coming back to continue to antagonize the party because revenants can't die until they kill the thing that they're trying to kill. So every time he comes back to antagonize the party, he just gets killed again.
Right.
He can come up with new and interesting ways to hamper the party's progress just because he wants to annoy the people that killed him.
Right. That would be somebody I would consider to be like an antagonist that wouldn't necessarily be like the driver of my story.
Right. He's like your first dungeon boss, and then he just kind of is like
right. So he would be a side bad
yeah.
guy because typically we're not so much worried about the one dude unless
like he's the necromancer that works for the big bad or whatever, right? He's like your level 5, level 7 dungeon boss.
Sure. And that's all fair. It just depends on how we're going to write up our characters. Because the other thing, once we get into we've established we're dealing with an ally or an antagonist or even my PC, right? My character. This is all applicable. What is the character's primary objective or goal? And this can change as they go through different things. Because obviously, when you've got a long-term goal, you'll break it into smaller stuff. So, for Pinky and the Brain, they want to take over the world. So the short-term goal is to develop the scheme, right? And the scheme has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to conquer the world. But typically, the primary objective or goal. So if you start off and you're like, okay, I'm a wizard. Well, your end goal may be being powerful enough to be the head of the wizard's tower or something like that. Well, that's, you're talking about 40 years and you better get pretty good with magic. But you've got a primary goal, something that drives that character forward, that's going to be central to their character.
Yeah, everybody has in most fantasy games, everybody has a personal drive for more personal power, wealth, influence,
status. That's going to be
if they're the good guy or the bad guys.
Yeah,
even the heroes at the table, they're there because they want more wealth and power and personal influence.
Yeah,
they want to improve their station in life.
You'll see that too in Cyberpunk. If you're in the slums, you're in the combat zone. Maybe you want to get enough money that you can go and move into a protected zone, or develop yourself so that you can get a corporate job for some reason. But whatever that character's goal is, it should be something that's large enough that becomes sort of the central driver.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about here. I'm not, I want to have a paycheck that buys me food at the end of the week. That could be a small piece of I need success in my life. I want to get to the point where I don't have to worry about anything. All right. And then, so you express it as I need enough money to be able to buy milk at the end of the week, but it's really, you got a success goal that may be a driver, and those kind of people, of course, may never reach it, but that's where we get into some of this. The other thing is, why do they want it? So what is the goal and why do they want it? So in Mr. Producer's example, like, I want that guy dead. Why? Vengeance. Why do I want to take over the world? Power, control, prestige, right? There's all that sort of stuff. So the why, and that can be just that simple of an answer. As an example, Mr. Producer, you got the some stuff we did prepare over there. And then how does their goal relate to larger conflicts, themes, or the settings, laws, culture, and power struggles? So if I want to take over the world, then obviously the goal is going to be quite relevant to those stories, those conflicts, and that sort of stuff.
You have to figure out, where does this guy stand in the bigger picture?
Because they're obviously going to make their mark on it.
Well, Skeletor would stand on top of Castle Grayskull. That's where he stands in the big picture.
Well, that's where he wants to stand. Right now he's on top of Snake Mountain. But come up to the top here. And turn it so I can see it a little bit. But, so obviously Skeletor's role is the antagonist, and his purpose, Skeletor serves as the primary antagonist to He-Man, seeking control of Eternia and the mystical power of Castle Grayskull. His role is to challenge the protagonist and create conflict in the narrative, right? So we've already answered our questions there. Then we get into his objectives, right? Primary objective is to capture Castle Grayskull.
And harness his
and-
power to rule Eternia.
Yeah, so there he goes. Why? Because he's Skeletor. And you'll see that the framework works even for somebody who's kind of a two-dimensional character. Skeletor never really had much depth, but the fact that he wants power and control and all that stuff was enough to bring conflict into the story.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely bringing conflict.
And now he's on the internet making memes, and we all love him.
We'd also look at it from the other direction, where the I guess the party would bring the conflict to the antagonist, like with Thundercats. Because Bob Rob was just hanging out, doing his own thing, and then these cats from space just crash on his front lawn, start tearing up everything.
Yeah, they're digging up the garden. They're doing all the stuff they do.
Yeah.
But back to Skeletor. Motivation is so he's got we talk about motivations, internal and external. Skeletor wants power, specifically the power to housed within Castle Grayskull. It is the ultimate prize for him in his bid for control. And then his internal motivation is a deep-rooted desire for revenge against those who have thwarted him in the past, and a craving for recognition and dominion over Eternia.
He's thwarting my plans.
He is thwarting the plan.
Kill
So, externally, right, the motivation is I want the control. Internally, he's also got this vengeful streak, and that's where he's he becomes almost obsessed with He-Man and the forces of Eternia, and his bid for Castle Grayskull to be able to reach that eventual goal of domination.
Well, we also know that whenever a person becomes a lich, all of their personality basically dies, and then their personality becomes their wants, desires, and driving force in their existence.
You've got to be pretty warped to get to that point in the first place. So yeah.
Yep.
So here's something, as we're talking about, particularly Troy, making a character that's from the world and not just in the world.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about this over the last few weeks, getting ready.
The first part is the backstory.
The backstory. Okay, so I know there's a lot of players out there and a lot of DMs that will disagree with this, and understand it's your table, it's your game. How you see fit is how your table will run. In my personal opinion, when you make a first level character, your backstory could be a paragraph, and you can cover everything that person has done of any significance.
For sure.
I worked at home. I had a job making barrels. I harvested the garden. Mom and dad had a fight one day and they kicked me out, or whatever. Or I was taken by slavers. I was thrown into service by the King's Guard. There's any number of things.
Right. And to Troy's point, when we talk about backstory, we're not talking about a list of deeds that is your giant resume to make you awesome. We're talking specifically about sort of where you came from that sets you up in the world.
Yeah.
Parents, home village.
The country, maybe the village name where you came from.
Yeah.
You can even have it on a small map.
Yeah. Did you have a mentor, or were you trained somewhere? Did you as an orphan, were you at a church? Who was the cleric in charge of the church?
Did you have a job at a guild? Did you make barrels? Did you learn how to brew? There's a number of things.
How did the political, religious, or societal structures shape their worldview? The urchin in the streets of Greyhawk is going to have a different outlook than the farmer's son out in the fields,
or the mage's apprentice in the court.
Yeah. So
completely.
What are those outlooks? How are they going to sort of shape their early worldview? Because that may be important to their goal eventually too. Why does the rogue want to steal everything? It's because he came from absolute literal dirt in the gutter, and that those things have
everything to him would have value.
Right, and that when he's working against the systems that caused him trouble early on, and those sorts of things. Again, it's, as you can see, it's all starting to come together here as we look a little bit about their backstory, as we get to the character, as we meet them, and then understand what drives them to go where the character wants to be in the future.
Yep. And as the player runs that character for a while, every night it's going to go, oh yeah, it'd be great if my character's history, if he had done this, or he'd seen that, or he learned how to speak elf because he had a girlfriend
Well, especially as you level up, you get these different things that can be part of the backstory.
Yes.
Well, again,
And so by the time you get to around 5th level, you should have a pretty decent backstory. Then you, Mr. DM, should collect everybody's homework one night and go through their backstories and look for little things that would be fun to put in your campaign in the upcoming nights. As an example, I did this, and one of my players, he talked about how his parents, one of the reasons he left home was looking for his parents, because a bunch of orcs came through one night, burned the village to the ground, and kidnapped and took a lot of people away. And his mom was found dead, but he didn't know where his father was. So he was personal quest, and his character's background was, I want to find my father. Like, okay, that's a worthy thing. And again, so this is just a short, wasn't even a page really. So they happen to be going through some dungeons and fighting a bunch of orcs.
As you do.
And when they're going through the treasure, they find a dagger that has the family crest on it from his dad. So that put it back into there. And once because everybody was overlooking it until I had to blatantly say, this is what it is. Everybody's like, oh, what? They had your dad in this place? Not necessarily, but these orcs at some point are attached to the ones that took him, stripped him of all his valuables, and you still don't know where dad is. But that brought it right into the characters, and the players ran with that for about 3 to 6 months.
Well, they derailed your game on accident.
Yes. Be careful when doing this.
Rule number 2 happened immediately.
Because the term side quest can take on a whole life of its own. And they went on a killing spree, hunting down every band of orcs they could find until they came across, where his dad. And at that time, I said it wouldn't make sense for them to keep him as a slave, just because of who he was. And so they found a pile of bodies in a large pit, and he was one of them. But it gave the player and the characters closure, and it also gave the table a purpose, and joined together to go do something that I completely didn't expect.
We got to help Steve find his dad.
We got to help Steve find his dad.
Well, here's the other thing. As we opened up with, those characters suddenly became from that world.
Absolutely. They were 100%.
It's not like I'm playing my character in a dungeon now.
Nope.
Suddenly, Steve's dad was real.
Right. That dagger linked them to that hometown, the little hometown village, to those other characters, and to that tragedy that happened when the orcs came to town. And it really, 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 everybody was in it. Everybody's in it 100%.
Yeah. This is true when we were talking about allies and antagonists as well.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, well, you're reading through Forgotten Realms, you see, this thing happened and there was a warlord that came through this area, and it could be a little single sentence entry. Well, suddenly, as we're dealing with this guy who's got a huge chip on his shoulder and he's causing lots of problems, he was a refugee from those earlier orc raids or something of that nature. And you're like, well, okay, well, now that character, my bad guy, is connected to the world. He's now from the world setting because he was a refugee from this other thing that did all these sorts of things that set him on this path. That can make those bad guys more believable. It makes it gives texture to their goals and objectives.
And their background would give them quirks and reasons why they do oddball things. Why does he always get up in the middle of the night and go out and stand to look at the moon? Well, because that's when they came at night and took everybody.
Right. He has a hard time sleeping from some PTSD issues.
There's a number of things. So the background can give you reasons why they do things now.
Even.
Well, yeah, like my crazy lizard folk thief guy. He sleeps inside a bag of holding because he was stolen as a child.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be out in the open because, as a thief, I see the things, I'm gonna take the thing. So he sleeps inside a bag of holding.
That's kind of wild. That's fun. But to the other side, on the ally side of things, where we've got the noble in exile, right? Man in the Iron Mask type stuff. what was it about that character's history that's now launched them into a bid for the throne to reestablish the correct
Absolutely.
and proper monarchy for the people,
Yeah.
as opposed to the tyrants that are on the throne now?
Yeah.
So that, those events are, of course, in the past, but they're what has created and given the outlook to this character that's now, maybe we're in support of this guy's bid for the throne. And as an ally, his allies, we're working through the story, but that ally's motivations and history and background are just as important as our villains, as they're just as important for our characters.
1000%.
Yeah. And then it can just be a few sentences. It doesn't have to be, pages upon pages. Even for your primary main bad guy, you need enough for you to know, and not necessarily will all that information ever be revealed to your party, but it has to give you some context and some idea to root that character in your world.
Yes.
So.
Rooting good.
Yes. Then we deal with a little bit of like psychological. Who is this guy? How do they think, right? What is our dominant personality traits?
Okay. I'm going to put a comma in your sentence there.
Yes.
What are his dominant personality, comma, traits?
So,
One of the most fun things I ever did in Planescape was make a Batsu demon have multiple personalities.
oh no.
Because the way the way they are created, they are a person that is tormented for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if there's anybody in the world, in the universe, that's going to have multiple personality disorder,
Right.
it's going to be one of them.
For sure. As the
And
psyche
his-
fractures to save
And
itself.
his psyche would fracture from time to time at different points of stress. He would be a Batsu, just back crazy, kill everything, and then fracture back to being Bob. Oh my lord, are you okay?
Yeah.
We need to get that looked at.
Yeah.
You want something to drink?
I've got a wizard character who was trying to lift a curse on the forest. So he made a deal with a fae in the Feywilds. So he basically shares his mind with a fairy. So
Oh,
he's like
no.
a 90-year-old man who basically has a split personality with like a 5-year-old toddler. Just
I don't know which is worse.
They both forget the exact same amount of stuff.
well, he's just an old
but-
man who wants like
but
peace and quiet. Trying to do
This is
stuff.
important too, right? So, if I'm dealing with a split personality or a two soul or a
There are a number.
possession kind of a bad
Yes.
guy,
There-
I need to know what all of my personalities are.
Right. So it can happen. I heard, I think, yeah, you and I, one of the times we were at CK, guy was talking about Ravenloft, and he had one of his higher level vampires was a multiple
Yeah.
personality. And like, oh, that's got to be crazy. Oh, sorry.
Well, if you're dealing with a character that is cursed,
Yes.
okay, normal. Well, we deal with this with lycanthropes.
Lycanthropes. Cool movie watched the other night with the Suicide Squad.
Mhm.
One of the characters in there is possessed by the evil witch that's
right.
destroying everything.
Mhm.
And like that's a definitely dual personality in the same character.
Mhm.
So if you have either the good guy, the bad guy, any kind of antagonist or something that you want to split like that, now you're going to have to make multiple character sheets.
Well, and here's the thing that's kind of fun is you can, when you have a different personality, you can have completely different physical attributions.
Yes.
So going so far as to change hair, eye color, physique, whatever it is you want, because particularly if we're dealing with high fantasy like D&D, if we're dealing with some sort of magical possession or curse, you're simply the carrier of something, and then as a lycanthrope, you go from this mild mannered, regular farmer dude to an 8-foot tall ravenous murder monster. So,
Well, what was that movie? The guy has the multiple personalities and like the
Well,
beast one. He was literally like, yeah.
Split.
that was
Awesome movie. I highly recommend it.
if you want to get into that, you're probably your starting point.
Well,
But
what was cool is, but like you were talking about with the different physiological changes, that's actually been documented in real life.
Yeah.
right.
There's been people with multiple personality. One personality has diabetes and has to take insulin, where another personality does not.
Yeah.
And their eye color changes, and whether they're left or right-handed changes.
Here's the final note. If you're going to do something along those lines, are those personalities cooperative or antagonistic to each other?
And be sure and to justify them and do a complete write-up on them.
Yeah.
Why do they do this? Why do they do just all of it? Justify it.
These types of characters make a better villain when it comes to something that's more investigative or story driven. So Vampire the Masquerade, Call of Cthulhu,
Yep.
Or something along those lines.
Yep.
would
My bad guy in the one that I'm writing about, the Forgotten Tower, he has multiple personalities.
Yes, for sure. So
Vampire Masquerade, to your point, with that one character, the Malkavian lady, one of them was antagonistic towards you, while the other one wanted to be an ally toward you. Like she's trying to get you to help her.
But that was they presented as two separate characters, but
yeah,
within that one character, the two personalities were at conflict because they had differing goals and stuff. So there's a lot of ways to do it. That wasn't my intention to open that can.
Well,
but,
what I'm saying is you can have your
yeah.
antagonist also be an ally with the split personalities that are at conflict with each other.
Which is, as I mentioned, they each get their own write-up at that point, even if they are the same physical entity.
Yes.
Because they can have wildly different everythings. But, again, personality traits. Are we dealing with somebody who's short-tempered and vengeful? Are we dealing with somebody who's trusting to the point of naivety, easygoing, lazy, whatever it is? What is their sort of dominant? How are we going to see these people? And then we deal with some of their fears, desires, or emotional triggers. Like Batman, why'd you say that name? It's terrible writing. But what are these people afraid of? Like, can I restore the kingdom? I'm afraid of failure, right? Loss. In the case of Mr. Freeze, one of my favorite bad guys, all of his motivation was after the accident to save his wife.
Yes.
And, the quickest way to get him to back down off of anything was to threaten her. The fear of her loss was central to that character.
Yeah.
And so these are things that you need to consider as you're writing up your characters. Are we dealing with something basic as arachnophobia, or are we dealing with something that's a little bit more tangible as don't take that thing from me? And then how do they view the concepts of law, chaos, fate, or free will? So based on their personality, based on the things that they're afraid of or they're pursuing, how does now their view of law, chaos, free will, the gods, or whatever it is in your world setting, add or subtract to those sorts of things?
Just a quick note, if I may. This is kind of getting into the description that we use a lot in D&D as their alignment.
Right. Alignment was an attempt to distill that down into something easy to recognize. Easy
to just describe. So if I may quickly, chaos, you had chaotic, good, chaotic, neutral, whatever. Chaos in that part means that you as an individual believe that your personal right to do basically whatever you want trumps what the government or your society wants you to do, the structure of it. Whereas lawful, like lawful good, lawful neutral, believes that the society's rules are to be obeyed and they're there for a reason, and that's how I'm going to act. Quick examples. Darth Vader is lawful evil. He believes in everything that the Empire stands for to the letter. The Emperor is chaotic evil. Everything is mine.
This is my empire.
This is my empire. So he definitely believes he is the rules. So the chaotic evil, lawful evil. Just a little quick note there. So when you're making your characters, good guys, bad guys, NPCs, PCs, keep that in mind. That'll help to that descriptor a little bit.
Even outside of systems like Dungeons and Dragons, this idea of alignment can help you quickly dial into some of the things we're talking about, the way that a character would pursue their goals, their outlook on other people, and that sort of thing. It gives
you a good idea of everything that character, how they would react.
Yeah. So particularly if we're writing up a henchman, and I don't need to go into my whole block of things here. I go, Steve, he's come from a bad background, always been in crime, chaotic evil. Done. There's Steve the henchman.
That's a bad guy.
Right, but at that point when what I want is more important and I'll do anything to get it is essentially the chaotic evil guy. That's all it takes to get you a henchman. You don't have to be super.
Yeah, you don't have
verbose.
to, go on.
Ideally, if you're writing, you will want to write a story with depth and detail and some subtlety. At least our main bad guy is going to be fleshed out as well as any other player character would be. But when it comes to the henchman, going into something like alignment and a quick couple of sentences will usually be sufficient.
Oh, yeah.
And then...
How is the world setting,
Yeah.
cultural norms, mythology, or history shape their psyche?
Well, this is something that's really important. If we're dealing with modern day versus Star Wars, right? That's a completely different culture. Even back to Dungeons and Dragons, Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms have a lot of overlap when we deal with their social structures, but all of that is completely broken down when we get into Dark Sun.
Oh.
Yeah,
there's a lot of differences.
Depending on what world setting or stories that you're telling, this can be really, really big, different.
Yeah, your world setting can give you a lot of background and to use to shape your story that you're going forward with.
Yeah. How acceptable is it? How far can I push these things before I reach a boundary? And who put that boundary in place? Is that you're meant to be my character's own moral compass, or did I come up against some sort of social structure?
Right. As an example, there's I forget the world setting, but it's actually illegal to go and be a dungeoneer, adventurer, to go into dungeons and come back with treasure, kill monsters, because you are a grave robber.
Yeah, they don't like that.
That's a cultural norm.
Well, it's sort of the same thing, right? Like we've got our the U.S. history is only 250, 300-ish years old if you go back to like early settlement 1600s. But to go and walk over to Mount Vernon, the Mount Vernon estate of Washington, it's a historical thing. You could take a tour. You go over to Egypt or to Jerusalem and you start digging around, somebody's going to come asking why. It's going to be, it's so even in our modern world where you're going to find differences and things. So that might be something that's important. Like if I'm an adventurer over here and that's great, and we take a ship over there and I want to go into that tomb, you're like, well, that tomb is not something you can just go into.
You can't just...
we have, the cultures will have different boundaries sometimes around those things.
In mythology, a lot of that leads into whatever mythos, pantheon of gods are worshipped in that country or world.
Even when we're dealing with older D&D stuff, Greyhawk, the way the elves saw the world, interacted with the world and their gods versus the humans and the way that they saw and interacted with things.
I'm sure what's legal in Greyhawk and what's legal in the land of IUs are two different things.
Yes.
Exactly. So again, we're dealing which social structures and are those pertinent, right? And how do they shape our heroes, our allies, and our antagonists?
And let us give praise and thanks to our Slayer, Cthulhu.
Yeah, dead.
But the dreamer must awaken.
And then so when we deal with influences, right? So we're not just built within a bubble. We were influenced from external forces, right? So that rogue that's in your party, he might be a bit of a jerk, but he's out, ostensibly with the heroes. Right. So what influences did he have in his life that kept him out of prison, kept him from being just another cut purse on the streets? So did they have key relationships? And what were they? How did they help? What societal pressures or expectations influenced them? Did somebody go, hey, I need to, I get it, I had to do what I needed to do to survive, but really I've either gotten into a better place or I just need to figure out something different? Then environment, setting, culture. If you're in a jungle and suddenly the jungle burns down and you're left in a wasteland, how might that external influence impact your character? Just a little.
Can I leave?
Just a little. Yeah, you can leave. But again, that external influence, and now you're setting off on this journey as a refugee from the decimated area. That can be really important to the character as far as their goals, their journey, their growth, the things that you know, that would shape who they are as a person. And then the main obstacles or conflicts that they face. Are they fighting an oppressive system, surviving in a harsh world, or dealing with an unknown force? You know, even our bad guys will tend to see themselves as the hero of their own story. So what is it in their mind that they're fighting against? You know, if I want to bring everything under control, is it because I just want it? Or do I need to establish an order where there is none? So these sorts of external influences can be important to consider as we write our stories and develop our characters.
Yeah. That's kind of a big one.
Yeah, in particular, because the thing that influences, I don't think get enough, you know, they get overlooked often.
Yeah.
You know, and then just like the story you alluded to earlier, that character's journey was from an external influence. Orc raiders came to your village and decimated it.
Yep.
I need to find what happened to my dad.
Yep.
Well,
And so he went out into the world and had this journey, and eventually was able to complete his personal goal. But if that external influence wasn't there, he wouldn't be that same guy.
Well, to your point, a great character that would be fun to analyze for that would be the Elusive Man.
The
Because he
elusive
definitely
man
had
from
external influences, but he thought he was the good guy.
well, that's a little bit different. So that's you have to. So the elusive man is a character in the Mass Effect series, and so he started as the head of this sort of human separatist splinter group in the galaxy, and then got involved in some stuff where he ended up being influenced and eventually puppeted by the main bad guys of the series. So he thought he was the good guy before, and then as he was sort of manipulated into this, he was manipulated into more extremes. But it wasn't a far push for him. And because of his own self-delusion, he thought he was in control the whole time. So he's a really interesting character to take a look at. But, you know, the big influence for him to start with was the First Contact War. As humans are breaking out into their own little slice of the galaxy, they encounter an alien species. And unfortunately, the first thing they have is conflict.
Right.
And of course, they outclassed, human technology and that sort of stuff. It was a big bloody fight, and it was kind of pivotal for the way humanity in that storyline was introduced to the galaxy. But you know, his splinter group was that external influence formed because of that experience. How do we protect humanity? How do we bring humanity up? How do I make sure that we remain dominant? That was kind of his outlook on things. But if it weren't for the First Contact War, he wouldn't have been along that path. And then later, he gets corrupted by the main bad guy for their own devices. And so he's kind of an interesting one. But those external influences are important. He wouldn't have been doing what he was doing had there not been that First Contact War.
Dude looks crazy toward the end because he starts off with like a little bit of cybernetic engineering, so he has like camera eyes and like a little bit like weird stuff. But like towards the end, he's got like nanobot veins and stuff going up his neck and his face. He's lost it, man.
That's one of the things we can talk about as you develop characters. As they descend further and further into madness, as they become twisted, so too does their physical form. It's a pretty common story thing. But it gives you a visual identifier to show I'm not dealing with the same character that I was, and that as the twisting progresses and he becomes more extreme, they go hand in hand. And you can see that he is warped by that influence, which is what happens with Emperor Palpatine or liches, as they get closer and closer to undeath, that sort of thing. But the external influences can be really important for a character. My example earlier of the royal in exile. Why was he in exile? That's kind of going to be the big linchpin of what's going on with that character.
That's a story through the ages. I mean, you can. Yeah. I mean, that happened multiple times in true history, and then there's a dozen different movies that use that as well.
Yeah.
So let's go back as far. The first one that I can think of was Moses was put in a basket and sent down the river. Gee, I hope he makes it. And it's found by the Pharaoh's daughter and goes, "Oh, hey, Dad, look what I found. Can I keep it?"
Yeah.
So then, years later, he grows up, and now they got a problem.
I'll feed him and water him and teach him the pantheon and everything.
But
But
again,
he's out
yeah.
of
these external influences, right?
you can't get more in exile than that, than living in the house of your enemy.
Ultimately, yeah.
So,
But hey, I had twins. Well, I can only have one heir to the throne. Well, we're gonna put one of them in the basement and forget he exists.
Feed him fish heads.
yeah,
Those sorts of things, those external influences should be considered because they can be in the character's history that one motivating event that really launches them into their journey.
yep.
And I missed. All right. Well, that's what happens when I type too much. I missed those internal influences, the way as a character reflects on the things that have happened to them, how they come to form these new thoughts. And usually it's in response to an external stimulus. You go, okay, what happened there?
Yeah.
Do they learn from their mistakes and change their tactics? Are they susceptible to changing their ways at all? Can they come off of a destructive path into something more constructive, or vice versa? Right?
I think you see that a lot in anime because those characters, the way they're written, they do a lot of dialogue, and they do a lot of dialogue about their internal struggles. Or I tried to do this to you, but you foiled me, so now I have to go and relearn. They do a lot of that kind of stuff in those.
You'll see that because you've got a lot of personal antagonists, and it's a steel sharpens steel story a lot of times, particularly when you're dealing with things like Dragon Ball, right? Like you're stronger, so I have to get stronger, and then all that sort of stuff. Not quite like the Mach 5, but
I don't exactly remember where I heard it, but it said the difference between good guys and bad guys is how they handle life traumas, right?
Well,
so you have Batman, who at a young age had both of his parents get killed, and he took that trauma and then processed it into becoming the superhero.
Yeah.
Where he had Mr. Freeze, who had this traumatic event, lost his wife, and then he took that trauma and became the villain.
Yeah, and a lot of times you'll see that where you might have two characters that have very similar starting points, and it's their outlooks that change them. Now, a lot of times it's those external influences. Bruce had the mentorship and the guidance of Alfred, yeah.
And the commissioner.
So Alfred and the commissioner. So he had a support structure around him that allowed him to better heal from that. But you can see definitely the sort of person that would become a terrorist. Like orcs come in and burn your village down, and as a child they're left in the mud as the fire rages around them, and their parents are dead, and all this sort of stuff. That person that becomes wholly focused on revenge, may not have had the right support structure, or would fallen into somebody that would have allowed him to elevate those in his mind, as far as versus somebody who would support a character in ways that are more constructive. So those external influences, even if they have the same starting point, you can end up with two different characters based on how they process that trauma, that process that early information, and then who influences them in what direction.
We were watching an episode of The Mandalorian the other night, and that whole thing, that culture, the Mandalorians, you're going to find just a badass warrior. They train their whole life as a warrior, and there's a difference between a warrior and a fighter.
Yeah,
a warrior fights for a cause, and believes completely in that cause. And when they find children on the battlefield who are orphaned because of the battlefield, they take them as a responsibility to raise them.
Yeah, they care for them. They don't just go, hey, we put you in safety. We go, hey, you're our responsibility now.
You're our responsibility. And I mean, that's the whole, I don't want to say the whole storyline, but it's a big part of them as a group, because it's really fun to watch them, the Mandalorian show going with Grogu. And because all you ever heard about Mandalorians before was they're just badass fighters, and they have great armor, and they can kill 1,000 stormtroopers, and just all of this stuff.
Right, the mystique around them.
Right, so you get into a little more of the nuts and bolts of them. And you're like, wow, I guess they're rewriting them as somebody with a personality that's going to care about kids on the battlefield.
Well, because they came out of a culture.
They came out of a culture.
That's hugely important to that,
Right. That's what I was trying to wheel it back around to. It's part of their culture, their heritage, and they're growing up, and and just their whole lifestyle.
Yeah. So again, there's the way that somebody internalizes those cultural things can be important, as well as the external factors themselves. So these internal and external influences are some things to be considered when you're writing your heroes, allies, and villains. The other thing here, Troy, this is getting back to your point. Why do we have a character sheet? Because they're going to do things in a certain way.
The sheet?
Yeah.
Or the character? Or the...
No, here. So we're getting... So tactics, the characters, right? The characters are going to do things in a certain way. So these are their tactics, their actions. Well, some of that's going to be their equipment, the things that they prefer to use, right? Am I dealing with a character that's more manipulative and cerebral, or am I dealing with a bruiser like Bane who will punch a hole in a wall?
Yeah, so the character sheet will start with the basics. Their name, their race, where they came from, what are their stats, what are their abilities, blah, 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 blah. But when you're making an NPC, you're also going to want to add a page in there of their motivations and their background. And their...
Same thing here.
Yeah.
But even if I'm sitting down to create a PC, right, I want to make a wizard. Well, this kind of, now I understand what my tactics and actions are going to be.
Right.
Without necessarily figuring out my character's background that got him into that job in the first place. So, if we're dealing with the character sheet side of a villain, okay, what are their tactics? Well, he's a necromancer, so I know that I'm going to have X, Y, and Z to support that, and this and that. And then, of course, when they get into conflict, if we're dealing with a social conflict, are we dealing with a physical conflict? Where do they like to be at? Are they in the shadows? Are they the face? Do they have anything that's identifying? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, especially if they're the person in charge.
Yeah.
You're going to want to know all that kind of information. Absolutely. And you write it down because you'll need it later. And if you could come up with everything like, oh, I want to do this guy, I want this guy to do that. I want him to look like this. And it all sounds great to you, but you need to write it down or in a computer or whatever system you use to keep track of things, because you'll need it later. And later, when you're being questioned by 5 players at the table, wanting to know what his mom's favorite color was.
Purple.
What was his favorite dessert growing up as a child? He's a 20th level necromancer. Does that really have any bearing on this?
It's not in this journal. That journal got burned when he killed his family to become a necromancer. This journal says, I want to take over the world.
But when you flesh out
we didn't
background,
find his journal. We found his...
it's a cookbook.
But when you flesh out that character, you want to write all that kind of stuff down in a way that makes sense to you, so you can refer to it later. And because you'll have a later, and then you'll probably have another later. And so you'll want to, when you make those references to your players, that you tell them the same thing.
Right.
And don't just make it up and, because that sounds good today.
As if we've got a bad guy that's going to appear, periodically, like Mr. Producer's Revenant.
those guys are fun.
What did he have on him? How do they pursue that? Like, if they're stealthy, what makes them stealthy? Are they just good at sneaking? Are we dealing with a technological setting, so they've got some kind of cloaking device? What is it that they've got? The character sheet will start to reflect those things. And then you've got, again, to Troy's point, the consistent template. This character does these things. This is what justifies it. And then I'm always going to be able to do those things.
So I was doing that with my major NPC bad guys years ago. And I still have those. And one of those is the one I'm using as the basis for my necromancer in the Forgotten Tower. Because it's like the front of the character sheet is all the pertinent stuff. Right. And the back is just notes and notes and notes and notes and notes and notes about all this kind of stuff.
This is one of the things too that as we're talking notes, these things will change and develop. Particularly as we're playing, like if I start as a level 1 goober, but if I'm a villain and I'm starting off and I'm, Skeletor for the first time, I understand that Castle Grayskull has a source of power. I could rule Eternia with it. And I go there and it's my first time attacking Castle Grayskull. Well, that experience, I go, this He-Man mother, and he's got so you want to make sure that you're taking notes for your allies and antagonists, things that are good and bad, things that those characters will remember. We see this now when we're going through and being jerks in Fallout 4. So and so will remember that. Yeah, son of a bitch.
So also,
so your characters should remember that.
to that same point, your first level, you encounter bandits out in the woods, and one of them gets away. And you remember him because he had a scar on his left cheek and his 6 fingers on his right hand. But when you get to be 5th level, 7th level, you see him again. Mm-hmm. That bandit is still not a first level bandit. He's grown and prospered as well.
Oh, yes.
So you may be 5th to 7th level. Guess what? He is too, or maybe more. So your bandits, your bad guys, or whoever they are, if they are a reoccurring NPC for your story, keep that in mind. The first time they run into him, he could be 1st, 3rd level. The next time they meet him, he's 5th to 8th level, just like they are.
I actually have 3 character sheets for the broker.
There you go.
Yeah, it's
because they'll progress as well. If you bring back the bad guy from when they were 5th level and now they're 10th level and your bad guy's still 5th, that's not going to be a very fun fight.
So these are things getting into this, particularly as like reoccurring bad guys. So how does the character plan to achieve their goals? Right? Oh, if I'm a wizard, I can cast massive amounts of spells, or I can raise the undead, or I'll raise an army, and because a charismatic leader. Is it through finance and manipulation? Who's the bad guy? How do they plan to achieve their goals? And then what strategies do they use to overcome challenges? The villains will encounter roadblocks that are more than just the party shows up and stops them from burning down the village. So, obviously you might consider there's some logistical challenges into raising an army. So
a few. They usually want to be paid.
What strategy?
Well, unless you raise an army.
But when there are challenges, what are some of the things that the villain will use? Are they going to default to force? Can they negotiate? Do they have? A
lot of the bad guys, force. Obvious. That's an obvious go-to.
Right.
But the ones that I really like, especially when you get like over 10th level, are the bad guys that they blackmail you.
Well, and
or the king, or they blackmail somebody, or they kidnap the princess.
And this is why they have henchmen. Right? If I'm the warlord, the first thing I'm going to do if that guy tells me no is split him in half.
Yeah.
But that's why I have Bob. Bob, go talk to that guy and let him know that if he doesn't say yes, I'm going to go talk to him with my sword.
Yeah.
But again, Bob's role when he encounters challenges will be a negotiate role, and it furthers the bad guy's goals.
And then he gets kicked into a jet engine.
when you're building your bad guys organization, think of it as the mob. They're up top somewhere. That's the bad guy, but they have captains and lieutenants, and they have henchmen, and they have an army. And so when they need something done, the boss ain't going to go do it. He's going to go tell one of his captains, lieutenants, go take some boys and take care of that thing.
And that could change over time depending on where we meet the bad guy in his progression too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he could be just the guy that's running around playing numbers, and the next time you meet him, he's like one of the captains.
Yeah, same thing with our allies. If you've got a sword swingy ally, you might have to step in and help him resolve the situation in a better way.
Right.
So that could create some conflict there. But as you're writing these characters, you go, okay, this guy really likes to solve problems with his fists.
Like Conan.
Right. So this, that might be some of his personality weaknesses, or maybe he's just quick to rush to judgment, whatever it is. And you go, okay, so this is how this guy will come up, and we're going to start to see that, and he's going to be there, even though he's an ally to the party. The party, I understand, should help constrain him. And you can use that as a foil to go, hey guys, don't be murdering everybody. Murder hobos.
Murder hobos are bad.
But on the other side of things, if the villain has enough presence of mind that says, I'm bad at this, I need somebody who can do this for me.
Yeah.
Or I want to stay in the shadows, so I need a face. Well, you go, okay, well, I just wrote myself another character now. But it tells you who the antagonist or the character is that you're putting together. How do they overcome these challenges? What lessons do they learn or fail to learn? Is this somebody who when they run headlong into a tree is going to do it again because they just weren't strong enough? Or is they going to go, hey, maybe I should change my tactics?
I just need to run faster.
Run fast. Okay, Flash.
One of my favorite lines, Jim Carrey as the Riddler, don't kill them. They won't learn anything. That applies to all role-playing games. It's very easy as a DM to just pile on more monsters, pile on more spells with the bad guys, but you want everybody to have fun.
Sure.
So, and you don't want to make them too easy, but there becomes a balance that takes time to learn as a DM how to do one thing or another. But just remember that if you kill them, they won't learn anything. So, meaning what's the plot of the bad guys and all this kind of stuff that you worked on building your story behind the scenes. If they kill off the bad guys too soon, they're not going to learn anything. If you kill off the good guys too soon, they're definitely not going to learn anything.
For sure. And then we've got how does their arc, the character's arc, reflect the story's broader themes, such as order and chaos, tech and magic, the impact of lore or history. Obviously, if I'm trying to control everything, and then so I want to have a good triumphing over evil, sort of as my broader high fantasy theme, then obviously this guy's tactics might be a little more tyrannical and hard-fisted, heavy-handed, and then I want that's obviously going to reflect the tyranny versus liberty, the good versus evil, whatever it is I'm going for in my story, and not everything they do is always going to serve that. But if you're, particularly if it's their like one of their primary MOs, then it'll probably be illustrative of whatever your story themes tend to be. So then we got some other stuff that we've talked about before. Dialogue and voice. We want to kind of give the character either some certain inflections or those sorts of things. A hat or a prop. These things.
Hats and props that go on the table. Like if you make a map. If just a very basic one, the players will love it.
The things
I got some bags from Amazon. It's a cheap leather bag. It's full of fake metal coins. That makes a great prop.
Well, the things here in particular, when you drop that scroll prop on the table and it's got the seal of the bad guy,
yes,
or of the the mysterious bad guy, because all we've seen so far is the symbol and ran into a few of his henchmen.
Right.
You find this, you're like, oh mother. That thing, that guy.
You killed or captured the assassin who's been plaguing your group for the last 2 or 3 levels, and you find a hit list with some of the names crossed off.
Right.
And the names of everybody on the table is on the list. And you guys were next, but you managed to take the guy out. Things like that can really add to putting those characters and players into the story.
Beyond that, it's a way that you can show you're dealing with an intelligent, somebody pulling the strings kind of bad guy, right? I'm removing obstacles, so I don't have to do it myself. There's people for that,
right?
So those sorts of things can be really cool. They can help you. If I'm dealing with a king, obviously I should have like a symbol of the country and that sort of stuff, the king's flag, the guard, things that will identify these NPCs. But if I hear a voice from the shadows and it's always the same sort of voice, then I know, oh crap, this guy is here now. Or we've done that too, where you put on your funny hat and you're like, okay, he showed up now. Yeah. So these sorts of things can be cool notes that you make for the character that help you role play it, help you express this character. Or if you're writing just the story, generally things that can allude to or particular to the character, right? Like Cobra Commander's mask is specific to him.
Absolutely.
Those sorts of things. How do they move or carry themselves? Are we dealing with somebody that has a limp and needs a cane? Are we dealing with somebody who's overly sure of themselves, like the bruiser type? Ha ha ha. Those sorts of things.
Shows up in a cloud of smoke, teleports everywhere he goes.
Right.
The broker, he's a very classical type tiefling, so he has a bunch of weird stuff about his body. To the point where he's basically disabled. He walks around with this large cane staff to help him get around. But most of the time when he's going places, I have on his character sheet become ethereal. And he just becomes a cloud and goes as wherever he wants to. He can't really walk that well.
No.
So whenever he gets into combat, as to your point, his way to deal with conflict is to escape.
Right. And these physical and behavioral traits will probably be things that you either had in mind to get from the get-go, or will make sense for the character as you have envisioned them. Habits, gestures, quirks, we've talked about, they're always itchy. You got your crazy informant, or somebody who's going through withdrawals, or they're shifty because they're paranoid. You can
go back to Benny from The Mummy.
Oh yeah, he's very much a weasel. And
He's very much a weasel. I love that guy as that character.
I know that actor did an amazing job.
It's just I love that character. I've used him for inspiration over the years. Love that character.
The other stuff here, so environment such as things like culture, profession, how does that affect their body, clothing, or mannerisms? And Forgotten Realms did a really good job with this, actually, where they talked about the different human cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Third edition book in particular had a sort of gallery as they went through and they were talking about this. It's like, well, these guys were darker skinned and they favored blues and this kind of material and this sort of thing. And so you're like, oh, okay, well, then these guys from this area had these sorts of materials, favored these sorts of colors in their culture for whatever. Kind of like what we would see the Celtic stuff and their tartan stuff. They had a particular weave. They had a particular pattern. The clans had different colors.
So he showed us with some of the more blatant races. Okay, so an orc, regardless of how great they are in combat, is not going to wear captured clothing from an elf.
No, because of the way that they see those people, right? And so
you can have some of those racial animosities and hatreds, or even idolized. Perhaps you have a dwarf that really likes the elf
craftsmanship. They care, but it becomes particular to this character as an identifier, right? So if I'm wearing these particular colors or armors, it says okay, I don't have to specifically or explicitly say in my storytelling that this is Demon Man from the underdepths of hell. Well, he's on fire. There's smoke and brimstone. There's all this sort of stuff. Or if I've got a noble person as sort of my string pulling bad guy, I'm going to know that because his clothes are clean. They're pressed. They're finer materials. They're maybe fabrics that you can't get easily. These sorts of things. So keep in mind, depending on the character that we're talking about, the cultures they come from, the lands that they inhabit, that can affect their style of dress, their preferences, food, and this sorts of things. Particularly if you're dealing with a character that you want to reveal slowly, one that's typically behind the curtain of things. These can be clues that, as they are revealed in the story, can tell more about the character as they're discovered.
Well, this sort of thing could also go into as a bit of a uniform, right? Like
also
all the bad guys are wearing sort of the same sort of clothes.
Well,
kind of like with Greyhawk, where they have the bounty on orc and goblin ears. So all of the orcs and goblins have like piercings and tattoos on the one ear.
Yeah, because it's basically their big middle finger for that sort of thing.
Right.
The other thing about it too, if you show up into the middle of a problem, a village is under attack. Well, if all the people are wearing similar clothing, it's like okay, it's a border town, and it looks like they were raided by a neighboring country or something like that. So those, just as we use clothing, you can use that in your storytelling for your characters. It should be there to help quickly identify station, importance, problems, whatever it happens to be. And it's one of those things that, as we played role-playing games, it's kind of like obvious, but I won't, bears mentioning in consideration, particularly if we're writing our stories, important allies and antagonists.
It should definitely be in the planning process somewhere.
Yeah, just to give some uniqueness to that character, right? And then finally, we want to talk about their through line of action. And so this is what drives the character's decisions and actions. Obviously, Skeletor's need for control and power are going to inform his decisions in the moment. Do I go ahead and escape, leaving Beastman behind to be captured? Well, yeah. Because I want power and control. Beastman is expendable.
Yeah.
In Skeletor's view of the world, right? And so these things are going to show up periodically depending on the different challenges and scenarios that these characters are going to get themselves into. How do they pursue their goal throughout the story, right? the heavy-handed thing, the deviousness, the justness, the gathering of allies. If we're talking about the allies, the heroic sort of storytellers,
Mm-hmm.
and then how does their personal journey connect with larger themes? Right? Do we start with something that's more humble and they get corrupted, or are we talking about something in Night City where it's hard knocks through and through, and they're able to rise above some way? Those sorts of things are what we talk about. The through line of action. We have these sort of considerations so that I understand who this character is, and as I write my story, the character will fit into that storyline. Their actions, the way that they react to world events, will be consistent within that character.
Consistency is important for sure.
Indeed. So there we go. That's we talked a little bit about allies and antagonists, and then of course actually putting the character together. And that's our 10-point worksheet. Actually, we'll have available on our Discord in the downloadable PDFs channel. So if you want to grab that and use it as sort of a worksheet to organize your thoughts as you write up a character. Again, it can be a couple words, it can be full pages, depends on how deep you want to go with your characters and what kind of story that you're writing. But the other thing here that goes into character development throughout opposition and support, right? So antagonists will drive change by challenging the PCs. I talked about this before, while the allies support transformation by aiding and reflecting growth.
Mm-hmm.
To that point, the villain believes they're the hero, right? This is the complex villain. If you come into conflict with another country, it's not necessarily because they're evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever they're pursuing has brought you into opposition with them. And this can be something as simple as like a territorial dispute, resources, and those sorts of things, or it could be as as overt and as an act as I've stolen your princess, and now she's going to marry my son. So all this sort of tropish kind of storylines, but they're not necessarily the bad. They're the bad guys. They're the antagonists of the scenario, but they're not the evil people that are trying to burn the world and stand on the pile of ashes.
Yeah, Bowser.
Right, but that's they're the villain of the story, but it's more complex than just they're evil.
Yes, it's always more complex than they're the bad guy.
Right, and that's kind of what we want, because it gives us a living, breathing world. It lets us have something more than just kill that guy, win the day. Resolving that conflict, of course, that problem now has different possible resolutions outside of full-scale war, and even if there's a war, how do you stop it, and can it be negotiated, this and that. There's a lot of things that you can do now with a story if your villain's more complicated than simple kill everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you know what your villain, like, you know where they came from, and you know what they're doing, and you know what they want, then you also know what they're actively doing whenever the party decides not to investigate something important.
For sure. I mean, that's their through line of action, what they're doing. But heroes are also more interesting when they're flawed.
Yes.
If everyone was the idealized paladin, that's boring.
It is.
This is why I think, particularly in the Arthurian legend, the Lancelot character, his desire for the queen, their forbidden love, all that sort of stuff, it humanizes him, and it's more interesting, right? Because it gives us humans. It gives us something that's relatable, not just, we're awesome knights and we restored the land. We restored the land in peace and everything was great. Done. The end. There's nothing to tell then.
No.
But, if you have heroes who are flawed, we've seen that with, like, Batman's probably a good example. At a certain point, he just started dropping people off of buildings.
Yeah, he had a bad day when they killed Robin, and
but Superman can be tricked and lied to.
Yes.
That sort of stuff. They're not perfect. So whether we're talking about the allies, our antagonists, or our PCs, they should have some sort of flaw. Something, again, where they're in their personality, they're so accepting and friendly as to be naive, and that sort of stuff. makes for a deeper character, even if that's all that we've got going on with it. But you can include reluctant allies too, corrupted heroes, and that of course is the one. Whether you fix that corruption or not, if you find yourselves on the same side, if whatever is the problem is so much of a problem that the people that you used to fight with every other week are now standing beside you because that guy's the bigger threat, that can put your characters in an interesting scenario.
Oh yeah.
I've spent half the game dealing with this warlord and the border raids and the things that have been happening, and we hate this guy, but now this ancient power has risen.
The enemy
because he was being
enemy is my friend.
Yeah. So these sort of corrupted heroes or my former enemies kind of things, or you can even have sort of noble antagonists, people that are giving you a hard time or causing you problems because they're trying to get you to grow. And you could see that in the mentor role or that sort of stuff, where they're like, yeah, I need you to go and do this, and then they put up roadblocks for you to figure a way around it, because in solving that problem you're going to come upon a greater solution or greater knowledge. And so like, yeah, the professor's supposed to help you, but he's also over there pushing you off the cliff. So I had to teach him the fly spell.
And Featherfall.
Yeah. So you'll see that sort of stuff when we've got more complex or flawed heroes and villains. Will give us, more flexibility, more avenues of our and within our stories, but it also gives us richer villains and heroes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So from there, duality of role, allied to enemy reversal, and vice versa, and then the foreshadowing and payoff. So if we've got, in the example of the exiled noble, in their pursuit of the restoration of the throne, you see them start to compromise their morals. They become, heavy-handed. They start to become vengeful. You start to see this person come off of the true path. That is unnecessarily loud. Sorry, everybody. But so they start to come off of this noble path and shift into something a little darker. That can foreshadow where on the back half of the thing, they've now become the antagonist. They have shifted far enough that they have to restore order, and they themselves become the tyrant. We've seen this different revolutionaries and that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Throughout history. They appear to be noble, have noble gains. They may even be sincere in their outlook, but the orders that they establish become tyrannical or restrictive and ultimately worse than what they replaced.
Like the Animal Farm.
Yes, we've seen those stories. So you can foreshadow that. Those are the kind of villains and antagonists you can include. Then they may start as allies. You may, this is great. This is what we want. What he's, espousing is the path forward for whatever. And then you get to the point and you're like, okay, this guy's actually crazy and he's lost his way and the order that's being implemented. We see this with the rise of Palpatine, the shift from the Republic into the Empire. The people that continue to support it because they'd always supported it, and the people that go, hey, hold on a minute. I want the peace and prosperity. We didn't want the CIS. The war was awful, the clones, the droids. But what we're doing here is worse, and so I can't support it anymore.
Yes, reach out.
So these are sort of the things that we can end up seeing there.
Strike me down.
And then a little bit here. Agency versus utility. Are they full characters with agency, or are they just tools for the story? So, sometimes that can be a little bit complicated to get into, but, the person that shows up as they're an ally, but they're there for one scene, and mostly they're the method you use as the game master to inject new information to the party, and then we never see them again. That would be a tool for the story.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a character that we're going to see more often or exists within the world setting, that would be a character that you would consider as a full character within your setting, whether or not they interact with your party or central to your story. And then, how to give them goals and inner lives. You think about that a little bit, but it's kind of what the story structure I laid out was that 10 points can allow you to sort of flesh that character out a little bit. Not again needed for every character.
Nope. The ones that are either reoccurring character or are central to the main part of the story.
Yeah.
No.
So I think I printed out too much there. That's our next show. Yay, we got our next show. But characters are the things that are kind of interesting, because particularly our player characters, which I've kind of talked a lot about our allies and our antagonists as we write stories, as we look to go ahead and build up what we're going to be playing through, because we're dealing with RPGs. For the player characters are some of the ones, when we have a cool character, they stick with us forever.
Yes.
Me and Mr. Producer have Star Wars characters we're still playing because they haven't been killed yet.
Right.
They're some of the most notorious.
Lack of trying.
They're some of the most notorious pirates, but they're fully realized characters with full backgrounds, and now, of course, a lot of play history.
Actually, I have a bounty because I'm a wanted terrorist.
Well, yeah, but you've had characters like that, and you've played with other players that have been successful in creating their player character as a fully realized character. So, talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, in the white box and in first and second edition, they made it a point that by 9th level, typically, you should have enough personal wealth that you can go build a stronghold and start attracting followers, and then you send them out on side quests or however you want to describe them. Knights, of course, attract fighters. Clerics attract people who want to be
Other
clerics.
clergy members, and
Thieves and rogues would build a thieves guild. So you do things like that appropriate to your class. But by somewhere between 9th and 10th level is typically when they say that. And I've had several characters that I have played from first level up to that point, but I've only had a few actually make the transition into owning property
right,
and hiring people to do stuff, and then watch your DM take great joy in introducing you to taxes.
Oh God.
And then you find yourself spouting stuff like Lando Calrissian. He used to be quite the scoundrel himself and thief and rogue, and now he's worried about negotiations with the trade guilds.
The trade guild miners.
And find your castle's been raided.
Yeah, it's one of those things that now your character transitions into a different kind of adventure, and if you have the right DM who can make that transition and still give you something that's playable, because now that character is going to have his own henchmen. You run around with your own little army, but you should have. If I have a 10th level character, you have a 10th level character, we put the table together. So we all left home again for some reason at 10th level, probably to do some kind of quest associated with saving the princess.
Something that's actually important this time.
Something that's actually important, right, to the life and welfare of a good part of the county.
Well, then, what I was getting at, a character that can do that, that's not what you set out to do, right? You're an adventurer. No. So understanding who your character is as they encounter these new challenges can be important.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of that's going to rest on the DM, because they're going to have to know ahead of time what kind of new challenges to put towards you.
But when you're playing your character and you go, okay, now I own a castle, is your character a boisterous drunk that attacks every problem with a sword? And so what are these challenges going to do to him?
Right. So
he might have a hard time getting his mining camp up off the ground, or he's going to have to go and find people he can get a hold of and go fix this.
He may have rubbed all the officials in the near town the wrong way, and they don't want to give him the mining permits or the title to the land.
But so if you start off with a character that way, if that's how you wrote your character and you come up against this new problem, that character is going to have to go through a rough period to then grow into. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the character is no longer that character, but it just means that character is going to go through some growth.
Right, because you still go out adventuring, and now that you're 10th level or better, but your adventures when you leave the castle are going to be different. And then when you're done with the adventure and you go back to someplace safe and secure to count your treasure and nurse your wounds. Now you're going to your castle.
Well, which is nice. But
And hopefully it hasn't been invaded by brave adventurers while you've been away
well,
looking for, the stuff in your basement.
yeah, that's kind of fun. So there's a lot of different kind of challenges out there, and developing a good player character can be a lot of fun, particularly if you've got into a decent game where, my character's development has been influenced by your character's development.
Yeah.
Because we've been adventuring for so long. And then early on we lost, Steve's playing a different character now, but he lost his guy at level 3 and had to bring a new guy into the table.
Yeah,
Fulgrim died, so then his brother Fulgrim had to go in.
Yeah, when I was running Troy, the fighter magic user, and Scott was running Talia Dannon, who was
some kind of elf wizard something.
No, that character was a magic user necromancer.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so that made for very interesting times. But she was what they called at that time a death slayer. So they hunted necromancers, they hunted undead with a passion.
Right.
But our two characters, we gamed together from like 5th level up to about 12th to 15th level.
Wow.
The two of us. A lot of the other player characters came and went, but those two were like the core. It's kind of like Kiss. It was Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley and
Right.
the new drummer every other year. But
Sure.
so when we would get together and do something, the two of us would put the plan together. Like, are you guys coming? And they're like, well, nice of you to include us.
Right.
It was like,
But those characters had been through.
Those characters have been through a lot together. It's like when Troy finally set out to, I wanted this piece of property.
Yeah.
I picked a spot that was in between two countries that nobody claimed because it was full of kobolds.
Sure.
And my thinking was, it's full of kobolds, it's going to be full of caves. And they're there because there's some kind of metal there. So that's what I want. So I hired every cell sword I could get, and we cleaned out the caves, staked my sign on it. This is mine. Hired a bunch of dwarves, find out what we got here, and hired some big people to start building. And so that's when I started, welcome to the land of taxes. It definitely sets up another thing. And the fun thing about it, though, is after a while, I had 2 other players that wanted to make that jump, too.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to make that jump. I said, well, you're going to have a couple bank accounts because it's going to get costly real quick, but it's a lot of fun. It depends on the game that you want to have. And if your players want to have that kind of game, then you as a DM need to spend some time looking into that and researching that. If you have a game, you have your table, everybody just wants to kill monsters and get treasure all night, or if they want a murder mysteries, Sherlock Holmes kind of thing, then that's the game you're going to make.
Well, to that point, one of the things, as we were talking about it, the allies that you present early into your game can help you set the tone up correctly as a game master. So if my heroes are going for tea with Professor so-and-so, and they're going to talk about his latest discovery, he just got back from Brazil and found some kind of serpent temple. Well, then we get there and he's been murdered. So I've established a sort of tone already that we're dealing with something that's a little bit more cerebral and a little bit less shooty.
A little less shooty.
But on the flip side, if you're a bunch of level 1 guys and you're in cages and the slavers have come in and kicked the crap out of your village and stuff, and you get to the slave pits and my ally NPC there is Grognak the Barbarian, who dual wields battle axes.
Yeah.
I can set up the tone a little differently where we're going to go and we're going to have to kick a lot of butt in this game.
I still remember whenever, I think it was AD&D, had improvised weapons specialties,
Yeah.
and your barbarian dude ended up using another guy in a bar fight and was dual wielding people as improvised weapons.
Yeah, it gets silly
If
sometimes.
you're strong enough and they're light enough, yes.
But, if you're, particularly when you're starting a new game, the allies that you put your players with can establish the model, if it were. All right, if I want heroes, I should have, heroic sort of characters knights, lawmen, those sorts of things to help establish what my party should mirror. If I end up with just, hey, you guys are a bunch of collected ragtag people, go and kill these rats in my basement. You may find that you've got some people without a lot of direction, and the tendency to be the murder hobo party. So paying attention to the allies, particularly early in the game, can allow you to establish a model for how your party should behave, what's expected from them. And then when the time comes to unveil your big bad guy, now you have some people that are already on the path of heroes to go and step into that next challenge. And the same thing, if we're talking about Cyberpunk, we're going to end up with a lot of combat and the world's a little darker, but the heroes, the allies that they have access to, the people that are giving them jobs and the types of jobs they take can also be things you can use in your storyteller toolkit to establish the party, to build the characters that are going to fit into the world setting and ultimately the story you're writing.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty good for today because we got a lot more to cover as we discuss allies, antagonists, heroes, and stories for this upcoming 2025 season.
It's going to be a fun year.
Again, we opened our own store. It's griffins.keep.us. Check out our webpage. We got links to our TCG player store, all sorts of stuff on there. It's a lot of fun. Of course, running a lot of D&D and things here in the store now. We're still engaged with our community. Want to give a big shout out here. I forgot to Tremendicon. Tremendicon is coming up at the end of this month. So if you're in the Southern Missouri area, check out tremendicon.com where you can get your tickets early. They're on pre-sale right now with good discounts for the weekend pass if you order online early.
It was a lot of fun last year.
Oh man, we're gonna be so busy.
We've been there every year since 5 now, isn't it?
Four. Year 4, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They got you guys know what a game convention is, so come on down.
Yeah, they've expanded gaming. We've got really good guests. Last year, Troy and I got our butts kicked by one of the creators of BattleTech. So,
Yes.
Lots of neat opportunities at this particular convention that focus on creators, collaboration, and gaming.
Yep.
I went broke in the vendor room. Got a really cool cleric mug.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff to buy, vendors galore, and there's all kinds of things to do because a lot of the, like I said, it's creators convention, so there's a lot of workshops where you can build, draw, paint, a number of things.
You can come by our booth, tell us that you saw us on YouTube, and make faces at us. So
Can't do that just anywhere.
I mean, I can't do it, so somebody has to.
yeah. Anyway, so again, we'll leave it there. I am Jester Borris with I Want to Be a GM.
And I'm still Troy, the Planescape guy.
Joined today by the disembodied voice of Mr. Producer. This has been Allies and Antagonists.
I didn't know what you say it.
I got it. We'll see you all next time.
Incorporealness sucks.